Anna Fahey, Principal Director of Strategy, leads Sightline Institute's communications, marketing, and messaging strategies, coordinates the organization's cross-cutting legislative campaigns, and serves on Sightline's executive team. Anna regularly partners with a range of national and regional partners to develop persuasive narratives and guidance for communicating about public policy solutions for climate and energy to election systems to housing and land use. She holds a BA from Smith College and a master's from the University of Washington. Back in Anacortes, Washington, where she grew up, Anna lives just a short dog walk with the kids, if she is lucky, to a favorite Puget Sound beach. And you can email her at anna@silent.org and follow her on Blue Sky and LinkedIn. So with this all said, I am soon going to paste Anna's email in the chat in a moment. But with this all said, Anna will our ears, and we're very thankful to be here with you. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Paula. I'm going to try to share, so bear with me for a second. Hello, everyone. Let's see. Get this in the right view.
Looks good.
Okay, I got it. Just see if I can see my notes. Yeah, so this is an intimidating crowd because I'm likely presenting to the most expert parking reform messengers in the world right now, all of you in the room. So I'm happy to be here, and what I'm going to present, some of it is really hot off the presses. A bunch of it we've been chipping away at for over a year. It also draws on some of the work Sightline and others have been doing over almost 10 years. And yeah, the experts are in the room. I've been working really closely with Parking Reform Network on this research, messaging research, and also really just like shadowing advocates from all over the country, many of you. And, you know, my job is sort of gathering and synthesis more than figuring out from whole cloth or from scratch what the best messages are. So I go around and gather like things that people are saying out there and get the opportunity to test them empirically with public opinion research. So thank you to you all. And like I said, some of this work is really pretty new. And so I haven't presented it before, and I'm looking at this as a work in progress and as sort of a way to workshop some of what we're finding with all of you in the room. So thank you for that as well. I'd love to hear from you about things we're missing, about what works and what doesn't work for you out there. And like I said, this work is situated in 10 years of Sightline message testing, focus groups, and surveys, and really pulls from the great work that folks are doing around the country. All right. So I will go, I'm trying to gather up from all the research that we've done, sort of a snapshot of some of the bigger lessons or themes that are rising to the top for me as I look across a whole bunch of different ways that we've tested things. So this is a first cut at understanding those kinds of themes and hopefully in memorable ways. But again, this is sort of work in progress, and I'm going to walk through each of them in turn. But first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the research that this is based on. So over the last year and a half, I've had a chance to work with Parking Reform Network and Welcoming Neighbors Network and others to do some a couple rounds of national level testing. So we engaged three different public opinion researchers firms, FM3, Global Strategy Group, and Grow Progress in 2024 and oops,
Your connection's
then online call boards. I'm on, uh-oh. I'm going to
you want to
turn off my camera. I'm going to turn off my camera, see if that helps.
I think you removed your
Yeah,
slots. Yeah.
I'll get it back here, hopefully.
Yes, they're back and they look
Okay.
good.
Now I need to get my notes back. There we go. All right. So you get a snapshot of this to zero in on sort of some particular audiences, suburbanites in the Seattle area, right-leaning and left-leaning groups in the Spokane, Washington area, and then online call boards in Washington and Oregon among folks living in smaller communities, small towns, and then a national survey with an oversample of Black and Latino voters that just came out of the field on August 10th. So that's the really new stuff. So going through kind of those rules of thumb. The first is to keep things visual and concrete. From the use of particular wording to really describing things and concepts instead of using jargon to talk about things in plain language and name real familiar things that people can see and touch and experience in their day-to-day is really important. All of that rises to the top in testing compared to some of the abstractions and unfamiliar concepts in this space, and things that feel more distant either in space or time. One big lesson is to emphasize waste. So the term wasteful parking actually does really well compared to some of the other ones that we use. It does better than excessive, arbitrary, one size fits all, etc. I think it's partly because of the concept of waste is a clear negative for people, and also because it's a term that people use themselves, right? It's not jargon, it's not complicated, it's not wonky. Then we recommend sort of showing and not telling. This is based on also some of the pro-housing research around just talking about different housing types in communities and upzoning. It's much better to describe and depict walkability and density than to say those words. When we ask people what kind of neighborhood they'd like to live in, they don't say a walkable, dense one. They say, I want to be within walking distance to the grocery store and school and my job, or I want a place where I can walk the dog and window shop and play outside with the kids and it's safe, etc. And then when it comes to environmental messages, it's better to focus on tangible nearby environmental harms than bigger abstract ones or ones that feel farther away. So I'll get into that a little bit too. And I will also lay out some of the concrete trade-offs that were helpful or that performed well in the message testing. We need to keep sort of drilling as communicators on the things that we lose when we have wasteful parking mandates, and we need to sort of highlight the promise and opportunities when we lift those parking mandates. And for the record, I will say that parking mandates has a more negative response in our testing than parking requirements. So that one holds up. So I mentioned tangible environmental harms. It's important to call out sort of these real concrete things that are in the space around us, versus sort of more abstract themes. Trees is number one. Across all of the audiences and demographics that we tested, trees holds up as a reason to support parking flexibility. Likewise, toxic pollution in local waterways, so stormwater runoff, heat trapping concrete and pavement, and then a little bit behind, but still in the top 5 or 6, that mandated parking adds paved spaces and contributes to sprawling development that leads to increased traffic, driving, and air pollution. And I will say this is the message that does the best, that gets closest to sort of a climate message. And I'll talk about this a little bit more as we go along. But climate change is sort of the one challenging message in the pro-homes and parking reform space. But again, there are other ways to get at environmental harms. And I should say, as I'm presenting sort of some of these specific messages and specific wording, these are all, most of what I'm going to talk about today and that you'll see on the slides are sort of the top ranked messages within the testing that we did. And so they are coming in at around 40% or above of intense support or negatives. So that's kind of how we're slicing and dicing it. The other messages that we tested are just a bit more abstract and literally less close to home, including climate change. Next are these concrete trade-offs, and this is just sort of off the charts, for public opinion research. These numbers are high. When you give people a choice, or force a choice, I should say, overwhelmingly people prefer other things in their community over parking, especially more homes that working people can afford. So this was one of our strongest testing messages around housing cost, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later too. But also people want more small locally owned businesses, shops and restaurants, more affordable homes of all shapes and sizes, more trees again, and green space. Basically everything we put in front of them, they vastly prefer to having more parking spaces. Now, people aren't usually given this choice, but I think the messaging takeaway is to play up the good stuff, and play up what you lose when you force wasteful parking, and what you gain when you change parking rules. This is also a way for us to emphasize both that the status quo is not working and really, again, focus on the benefits and promise of nixing wasteful parking mandates. All right. The top performing messages in favor of parking flexibility tend to center on people's sense of place, their local community, and on their sort of hopes and dreams for that community and how it looks and feels. I'll share some of the specific language that tested well in the next slide, but just wanted to call out that historical preservation, sort of the historical character of a place, does well. This idea of kind of protecting the unique local charm and character of our main streets or old parts of town. And then small businesses messages, especially including ones that sort of call out iconic or archetypal or concrete and specific types of businesses that people want. And I said community character for good, not evil. That's because we know that character can be used or weaponized against change, especially adding more types of housing in some of the other conversations we're in. So again, appeals to community character, specifically the preservation of historical areas and main streets, are highly persuasive messages in favor of parking flexibility. In this slide, it's a little bit of an insider wonky public opinion thing, but again, as I mentioned before, those numbers on the side, 47, 44, 42, are the very convincing, the share of people who found the argument very convincing. The total convincing is sometimes less important to us when we're looking at what resonates with people. So these are the numbers we look for. And again, we look for around 40% or higher. So right here, you're seeing the top testing messages, and you'll see historical preservation, this Main Street message, small business. Interestingly, a waste / outdated message does pretty well. That parking mandates are based on 1960s era guesses about future needs and don't reflect what communities or businesses really need today. I think this is sort of one of those combination messages. It taps into that sentiment about waste, but it also feels like common sense, like it's not working, it's outdated and we should fix it. Then there's a daycare message. Again, this is sort of taking a common and known community need, childcare, and using that as an example of what we lose out on and what we could have more of with parking reform. And then a little bit further down, the waste square feet. Our cities require far more parking than people need or use. Today's rules require hundreds of square feet to stop wasting, hundreds of square feet of parking for every new home, no matter the location or residents' needs, etc. I think this is another good message that underscores the sense, the framing around flexibility, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. All of these 6 messages that did the best performed well overall, as you can see. They also did well among our swing and sort of persuadable groups and across partisanship, even across sort of geography, so urban, suburban, and rural, and among the Black and Latino voter oversamples. Among Black and Latino voters, a handful of additional messages resonated. These did well, again, among other demographics. You can see the overall number is on the left there. And again, in just about every message that we tested did quite well among a base of supporters who stayed consistent across the survey. So that was about a quarter of respondents who showed consistent, strong support. And they love all of these. Like, they're very convincing numbers, are in the 50s or above. But in addition, we had the oversamples, and the highlighted messages are ones that did well among that base, also among Latino and Black voters. Cost and equity focused messaging resonates much more with Black voters in particular. All of these messages did consistently well with that solid base of support, the 25%, who are also more likely to be left-leaning and younger. But then we have some messages that we can call out as we are tailoring our communications to other demographic groups. And more messages here that perform particularly well among Black voters too. All of these, minus the business cars message, second to the bottom, were very convincing as well among Black voters. So, like I said, all of this is pretty new. we're still going over the results and crosstabs and compiling what we learned from the latest survey, along with the other national research and qualitative research that we've done. So please look at these with an eye to questions that you have, and also look forward to a resource or resources that more clearly do the work of calling out strong messages for certain audiences, as well as sort of an overview of our top recommended talking points in language. We're working on that. All right. Flexibility for the win. Flexibility seems to be a frame that both is pretty popular with people as we test it, and also helps us sort of frame the conversation. There's definitely anti-growth and anti-developer sentiment out there that we see in this research. In our recent survey, people did express concerns that we've heard before, that if left to their own devices, developers will cut corners and not provide enough parking. Like, this is a fear, right? The flexibility as a frame helps us sort of inoculate against that or pivot from it to things that also matter or matter equally or more to people. Because we're finding that flexibility makes sense on a sort of gut level, or to reasonable people who can agree, it makes sense far more than it makes sense to have rigid preset parking amounts. So you see this forced choice question, and again, the number 73% pick flexible amount of parking versus 21% who pick a constant automatic amount for every housing unit. What's particularly promising here is that the don't know number is pretty low. And I will say that overall in this latest survey, and actually across all of the polling, is that there's a pretty big share, often even for the messaging, of folks who are undecided or don't know. And that basically just tells us that people haven't heard of this before. It's new, it's unfamiliar. The good news is that when they do hear, typically majorities, when they do hear our messages, toggle to support. Now, just as another flag, people might not entirely know what we mean by flexibility. It's possible that folks who have different views about parking interpret it as having more parking, something that we need to dig into a little bit more. It might not matter. That might be working to our favor. But the good news is, again, that people do think it makes sense to adjust parking amounts based on the specific site and location and use and neighborhood. And so we need to lean into that concept. And again, they don't like the idea of waste. So flexibility is a solution to that. And a message, again, the message that performed well about sort of outdated rules being wasteful and adding costs and not addressing today's community needs, I think is a nice way to bridge from waste and costs and harms to flexibility as a solution. It makes sense to people to update the rules that aren't working anymore. And it makes sense, especially if we give them new ways that they maybe haven't heard before about how to think about it. All right. So connecting to housing costs. We know from this research and every public opinion survey ever over the last couple of years that housing costs are top of mind for just about all US voters. Voters want more homes. They want more homes they can afford. They can see that there's a shortage of housing, a shortage of housing options if we talk about it in the right ways, and they want solutions. I think there's still some work to be done to link parking reforms with people's experience of cost and with the housing shortage and prices. But when we give them a choice, again, voters overwhelmingly say they want more homes over more parking. And it's what we're finding is that it's good to be very direct about costs passed on to renters and home buyers. Saying that monthly rent will go up by $200 is a far more powerful way of expressing it than saying that each stall will cost $5,000 to $60,000 to build. It's just that one more layer of distance from those numbers. It's less personal, it's not about me, and it's less direct and concrete. All right, this is a tough one. There's obviously a lot of fear and some deeply entrenched habits and infrastructure and culture and lifestyles that makes parking an emotionally charged issue. What I've learned, and that most of you have probably learned as well and already know, is that most people default to a driver perspective when they think of parking, when parking comes up. This was super clear to me when in focus groups we showed people images of lovely, sort of pedestrian, people-friendly, great window shopping neighborhoods and tree-lined main streets, like this one. And as I said, overwhelmingly, these are places that look inviting and appealing, and people like it and want it. They want this in their community. But surprisingly consistently, people then sort of shift gears, excuse the pun, but start to think about how they would operate in this space. And almost every time it's, how would I drive here? How would I park here? It's interesting. It's fascinating to me, but they're thinking as drivers, as their default, not as one of the people who's existing in this space in other ways or living there or, experiencing that space as a resident or pedestrian. They are thinking as drivers. And when we did the national testing, we used this familiar graphic and asked people which one of the 4 quadrants seemed like a good idea. And again, surprisingly, I think these illustrations actually prompt people to toggle to sort of a car and driver mindset as well. And maybe it's just when you show any car, any visual of a car, that happens, but they're not thinking, what kind of place would I want to live in or shop in or hang out in? They are thinking, how would I drive there? Is there enough parking? And so the results on this question were that they chose the 2 sort of middle ways. They didn't choose the extremes of no parking or 1 space per 100 square feet that looks a little bit like a drive-through. They chose the middle ones at 1 space per 250 square feet and 1 space for 500. I think it's just because of car point of view, driver point of view. So I think our job, or one job we have to do consistently, is to get people to think out of that box, outside of their car, and toggle them to look and to the sort of the look and feel of the place as a person in it, as a person walking, a pedestrian, as a parent or caretaker or dog walker or jogger or person meeting friends, etc. And toggle in our communications to ways that we experience urban spaces and the places that we live when we're not in a car. And I can say empirically as well that critiques of sort of car culture do not perform well. Even if people really do want to live in places where mode shift and transit options and walking are possible and they have opportunities to do that, they seem to not want to be told to do it, or they don't believe that it will be possible to do it. And this kind of seeps into some of the climate messages that we've tested over the year. is there's a little bit of a sense of bleakness about the possibility of doing it, and that makes people less makes them a little bit resistant to the message itself. So the recommendation, and again, I will be sort of refining this as a bit as we go and trying to give people some more applicable tools. But I think that we need to shift in our communications, especially for certain audiences. I mean, some people are with you on this and you know who they are and you can keep going full speed ahead. But for sort of more general audiences who are less versed, I think we need to shift the emphasis from sort of car storage to wasted space, from, you know, homes for cars versus homes for people sort of messages to really talking about waste and empty parking lots and the costs, the costs that we all bear because of that in housing costs and impacts and harms on the community we live in and the environment. People see car storage as necessary. Most can understand the downsides of mandated wasteful parking and the community costs of too much unused asphalt. And they want to have a say when asked in the amount of land that we dedicate to parking. But just telling them that like half of the city you live in is parking lots, or telling them that most households have 1 or 0 cars didn't land as well. I think it's just because people don't believe us and feel helpless in the face of sort of the car culture and infrastructure that we're all locked into. So some work to do there. That was long-winded. Little tangent on the driver point of view, but I think it's important. Again, toggle to the non-driver experience, using words, but also using visuals, right? Like showing imagery is important actually in all of this, of the big wastelands of empty asphalt, but also of these sort of urban city scenes where people are doing things other than driving or parking. Again, avoid car versus people messages and emphasize parking flexibility. All right. I will wrap up, but just to close, I want to say parking, we're finding, is amazingly not yet polarized, not super politicized, which is a shocker in August of 2025. Maybe that's to come as we take these things more mainstream every day. As you win, you start to build up more opposition. But when people of all political stripes and backgrounds hear our messages, they click. Nothing stands out as super alienating to any particular audience. I mean, we do see some drop off. And again, future resources will go into this a little bit more. I mean, we see probably most of the drop off around the messaging is with like very rural respondents and smaller people living in smaller towns where maybe the issues don't seem as urgent. But anyway, nothing stands out as particularly alienating. All of our messages are doing pretty well, except maybe climate change messages specifically. And that's because that issue is polarized for people. But I think there are some clever workarounds to talk about sprawling development, to talk about air pollution and other environmental harms, and to talk about sort of the way we live in cities as ways to get at the climate connection. What parking is super emotional and personal to people, which can lead to this resistance or backlash to change. I think people do feel locked in. The knee-jerk response, because most people are drivers, is to think about how will I get around in my car, and they default to driver thinking when the issue comes up. Like I think probably when you just say the word parking, but there are opportunities. I think folks in this call are doing a really nice job. Some of the messages that tested well will be very familiar to you. They're the Main Street village charm messages coming out of Connecticut, or the stormwater and environmental harms coming out of North Carolina, all being supported and propelled by Parking Reform Network. Anyway, the opportunities are that we can toggle people to a community-minded point of view, to a point of view of someone who lives here, who cares about the community, who wants it to grow and be full of promise. And again, get people in the mindset of I live here and not just I drive here. And especially in the messages that talk about people-friendly places, that kind of descriptions of walkability and density that people really do want. And just to call out again, people are especially receptive to messages about these friendly neighborhoods, but also the housing in those neighborhoods and having more housing that people can afford. Again, before I stop, I want to remind you that this is sort of a chance to workshop all of this. We'll be digging into the research more, as I mentioned, and I hope you'll stay tuned for some more resources that, again, more clearly call out the strong messages for certain narrower audience groups, demographics, rural, urban, Republican, Independent, Democrat, as well as sort of an overview, as Sightline does, of our top recommended talking points in language. I will stop there and hopefully my video can work.
I think we're both pinned now. Is that right? Oh, here you go. Okay, cool. Thank you. That was great. Now we're going to do some Q&A and discuss this. So I was taking notes, and so the first one question is, are we going to be able to get these slides and share them with people?
Yes. I will be happy to share the slides. I think they're not quite ready for prime time for like sharing out on your website or something like that. So we'll figure that out. But yeah, definitely want to get these into all your hands, and especially some of the other resources that we're developing right now.
Great. So I have a couple quick questions here then around just what was collected and what was not. Folks, I was just kind of compiling these and adding them in. So your question hopefully will be referenced in here. Did you crosstab suburban versus urban? Like how much did you know around where people lived and what were the main kind of like differences in what messages, and I caught something at the end of the presentation, but what messages appealed to suburban versus urban versus rural voters?
Yeah, that's a good question. What I find a little bit baffling about sort of interpreting these results is how well things did across all the different demographics. In some ways that makes it harder to sort of call out like what's working best and worst and to give recommendations about what to use. Like I said before, some of the messages did fall off for rural voters. And I think it's just because, I mean, it sort of makes sense, right? Like rural voters are not going to be as excited about like Main Street neighborhoods or the proximity to grocery stores and transit and those kinds of things. Like it's just not their lived experience. We do know from the pro-housing framework research that even rural voters appreciate those things for cities. Like it's still sort of an appealing concept for rural voters. It's a tongue twister. But they're not going to see the urgency for their lives anyway. And that's exactly the kind of thing that we're going to be digging into a little bit more, so that we really can provide a resource where you can zero in on the messages that are at least most powerful for different demographics, including rural, urban, and suburban.
But so far, suburban and urban didn't change that much, it sounds like.
Not much. The bigger changes are around age.
Mhm.
So I think it's like 18 to 40-ish. And then more left-leaning in general are more receptive overall. Like that's probably making up our base.
Okay. Was there polling on, there were a couple questions around like the reuse of parking spaces. So when we talk about keeping things the same in main streets or preserving versus reusing on-street spaces. There was also a question around car share and shared mobility. Were any of those kinds of things polled?
Yes, and there's probably more to do in that space, in terms of further testing, because we'd also like to start testing sort of on-street management questions and sort of like what do you do with parking once you've changed the wasteful mandates. But I'm trying to pull up a slide here. I think the reuse question relates to some of the other messages that we tested that did perform pretty well. The idea of waste it performed really well across a bunch of different ways that we tested it. The idea of sort of things being spread out, empty pavement, this kind of urban form set of questions do pretty well too.
Mhm.
And then the business, sort of small local business, economic vitality, also I think touches on the Main Street message and sort of the historical preservation message is like we don't want to erode these places that are sort of the heart of our communities by paving stuff over. So it doesn't quite fit with the reuse question, but I think there's enough to say that people don't want more pavement in the middle of the city.
Mhm. There were some of these questions were kind of like, hey, if for example, with car share and shared mobility, like would people respond more favorably if you have a discussion around car share? And I could just say, having worked with you on developing the survey, it's really hard to pack a lot of things in there, but I do think one message is probably it all works. If you can combine two messages, it's probably going to help. Would you agree with that? Like,
Yeah, I mean, the luxury we have, and also maybe sort of the curse, is like people haven't heard much about this stuff. Almost everything we tested did relatively well and moved the needle. I should say we also tested some opposition message. And over the course of this last survey, sort of tracked people's support for kind of a general parking flexibility message. It starts out decently high. It's like 60 some percent in favor. And after hearing all the favorable messages, it bumps up a fair amount, a healthy amount. And then after hearing the opposition messages, it ticks down a tiny bit, but it actually keeps pretty high. So yeah, I think it's the problem of having no wrong answer. But I do think what we come out of all of this with are sort of the 4 or 5 messages that we should always be saying in one way or another, that we should be leading with, and that should sort of shape our overall campaigns and communications. And then are some ways that we can really drill down and think about what resonates with different subgroups as well. So that's a little bit of a non-answer, but
No, it's great. Did was there polling around on the on-street side of things? This was like around parking meters, parking permits. Did that we didn't?
not yet, but I hope that that will be phase 2. And I do think that as a movement, we have a lot to learn about sort of how to get into that. I don't know, Tony, if you have any ideas, but we should keep talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, making those things popular is really going to be tough. I also just as I do know this did include political affiliation or preference crosstabs, so that's information and what was the kind of that was pretty even, or were there any big shifts for political stuff?
Um, Again, and I even asked the pollster this, I'm like, are we doing something wrong? Because this is not polarized, right? Like, are we asking the wrong questions? And they reassured me that it's because people really have not, that's not a saturated space. People haven't thought about it, which can be, like I said, you know, there are some sort of default or knee-jerk reactions that are less productive for us, but they're kind of more emotional around parking. They're not yet political. I don't know if we look forward to them being more polarized because we know we're getting this idea and these solutions out in front of people more, or if we're happy being in that space. But as you know, all of you probably are aware, and Tony, you know, a lot of these bills and city efforts have been bipartisan efforts and sometimes led by one party or the other. So, I mean, I think ideally we keep that space, but there are a few, let me just see here, a few places where different messages resonate differently by party. I will call out again that the trees and green space message did well did like the top #1 across all parties, across city, suburban, rural, and small town. The message about adding $200 to rent did really well also across all of those. So sort of a local harms and then housing message that both did well. And the outdated 1960s rules that are wasteful and costing us did really well too, except slightly less well with Republicans. Anyway, those are exactly the kinds of things that we'll be sorting through and kind of devising some sort of strategic way of tailoring messages to certain audiences.
Great. There was a question that came up towards the end that I think is something to touch on, which is, these messages talk about big picture over under parking, but when it comes down, push comes to shove, people don't believe that we can this is in the current time, we need these cars to get around. So how do we, how are these messages really working? And I think this ties in also to how does this impact small business? How does this impact working people? So it's kind of some of these questions about when the rubber meets the road. And I have some thoughts on this, but I'm curious what if the polling sheds any light on responding to these kinds of real world impacts of the policy change.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the big challenge when you enter into into the political fray, right? But I do think what we're finding here is that people sort of hold two views or two realities in their head at one time that can be in tension, right? Like you can sort of have that fear, I need parking, I gotta drive places response at the same time that you're like, no, I want to protect this place. I want to live in a place that's feels good and friendly, and I want local businesses to succeed. And so, as with a lot of our communications recommendations, it's sort of the words matter to the extent that they can help people toggle to that viewpoint, right? Because they have it. It's maybe just not the top one as they go about their day or they think about a policy. So, I mean, that's kind of the power of strategic communications. It's not a silver bullet. It doesn't change people's minds probably very much. Maybe it does if they've never heard about anything, but it's that toggling to sort of the better perspective among people that we can persuade. That is kind of the magic.
I'll add too. I find that choice language, which I don't know if we messaged much, but that I emphasize that the city doesn't change when you change these rules immediately. It's still the same place. We're not forcing. I say this a lot nowadays, especially when I'm talking to bipartisan audiences. Like I'm not. I may prefer to not drive, but I'm not trying to make anyone else do this. I just think we don't have enough options. And I even show pictures of one restaurant with a bunch of parking and a downtown and say, just think how many menus there are, like just the options available to people in these two areas. And all we're trying to do is allow for more choices. It's not, or even, and when you talk about the waste in the space too, that's not political. That's just physics. Like you can't get everyone's car into a space. Democrat, Republican, suburban, urban, that's just a fact. And so like I think those kinds of messages help when you're thinking about the right now. It's like, yeah, we understand this is right now, but we can't ever get to point B if we don't change the rules as they are now. They're in the way. And same around transit too. I think like people want transit right away. And I'm like, well, if you keep requiring this parking, you're never going to get that. So I do have to pop out myself. Paula, if you want to pop, I don't know if people want to hang around and do Q&A by raising hands. But I think this was great. Thank you. I have a call about the Yimby Town where we'll be in a couple weeks, where we have a session on this topic on Tuesday at Yimby Town. So if you're there, join us. And I have to go talk about the Donald Shoup Awards, which you'll find out some about tomorrow in the newsletter if you're subscribed. So I'm going to give this back over to Paula and hop over to that call. But thank you so much, Anna. And thanks everyone for being here. And you guys wrap it up. Paula, do you want to?
Okay. Yeah.
I'll pin you and then I'm out. Okay.
Thank you so much. Would you like to say something before we finish?
Just thank you, to Parking Reform Network and everyone who's here. And yeah, look forward to more. I wish I could have had a more polished resource to hand off, but it's in the works. So I hope this will be an ongoing conversation too. I look forward to looking at all the questions.